All right, welcome back to the 51 Hudson build. It's day 7. This video is probably going to be day 7 and 8, depends what I have on it. This is one of those days where you spend hours in the garage and really don't have a whole lot to show for it. And actually I was in a state of not panic, but I had some problems I are going to have to overcome here, and I think I've come up with a way to do it. Let me show you what I'm dealing with now. So this was supposed to be a straightforward video. Because I got the engine and transmission set in the car, gonna build engine mounts, right? Got the engine set in there. And then I noticed the issue with the steering and the exhaust. All right, well, let me go over a couple things first before I get into the madness. Obviously, off camera, I set the engine and transmission in the car. Got it so I have my clearance I need around the steering rack, top and bottom, which is probably maybe a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch. It's not a whole lot, but it's all I need. My spacing to the rear of the car is good. There'll obviously be some things to deal with, like the wiper motor that used to be there. I'm gonna have to work with that. That tube coming out there is actually the drain for the cowl vent. That's not gonna work. You don't want water just shooting onto your map sensor. So I'll be cutting that off and working out something else for that. What else did I do? I have the transmission supported right now just by a piece of square tubing, just to keep it up in place. The engine is level side to side, and right now it's pretty much centered in the car. Now what I ran into here, what I didn't notice before, was the positioning of the power steering rack to the firewall. It's really far back. It's further back than any car that I've put a Jag front suspension in yet. And it's kind of surprising because this is it's a big car. This is not a Vega. These cars usually have plenty of room. And you look up there at the Buick and you just notice how far away the front axle is from, say, where the cowl is. There's a good amount of distance there, and that's normally what I run into. This car, and now I understand why it had that crazy center point steering linkage setup. The firewall and the cowl area is so far forward to the engine that your steering wants to shoot way out further than it needs to be. So they use that linkage to get the steering rearward where it needed to be, even though the steering column wanted to shoot out toward the front of the car. So now what I'm dealing with is a very steep angle from the firewall down to the steering there. The other thing that caused a problem with that was the steering to exhaust clearance. So when I first set the engine in here on mock-up, I stuck a pair of truck exhaust manifolds in here, and they looked great. I mean, plenty of room everywhere. They were going to work. I wasn't concerned with that. Then I happened to look at where my steering shaft was going to be in relation to those manifolds, and it was going to crash right into it. I don't know if I have the manifold here. See if I can do this with one hand here. I have studs in the block, in the head rather, to do this stuff because it's easier. Come on. Okay, so there's where the truck manifold was on the engine, and the steering is under there. So the steering shaft was going to run right into the manifold. Now, I could probably sneak under the manifold, and that's an option. What may happen is I could run the steering shaft off the U-joint underneath the manifold way down low and run a real long steering column shaft to catch that point and run a short shaft down to the steering rack. I think that'll work. Okay, I have come up with a solution. That looks pretty good. I can get under that manifold now. What I did was the old GM big block Nova trick, big block Camaro trick. I moved the engine over to the passenger side a 1/2 inch. Big engineering, but that does the trick. That's what GM did in the big block X-body cars. Get some extra clearance for steering, and that's going to work for me. So I moved the transmission over a 1/2 inch to the passenger side, shoved the engine over a 1/2 inch to the passenger side, and now I know it's hard to tell looking through this video here because it looks silly looking through my camera here, but this is going to work. I'm going to end up running a longer steering shaft down to somewhere around here, and then a U-joint, and pick up that point there and come right around the manifold. That'll work. I can do it with 2 joints. I don't have to worry about a 3rd joint and a support for the shaft. That'll work great. The only question is going to be the angle of the steering column. I may have to put a tilt wheel in this thing, which was not in the plans. And but I am doing some things here for the sake of time versus style, I guess I would say. But as long as this thing runs and drives by October 1st, and it's blue with stickers on it, and the kids will have fun with it, that's the goal. So, all right, so this whole video was supposed to be about building engine mounts about 6 hours ago. So now I think I'm back to the point where I can take this manifold off and start going over some engine mount building stuff. Glad I didn't build the mounts before I caught this, because then I would have had to start over and shove the engine over. This works out much better. Okay, I think I'm happy now. I can take a breath and get on to engine mounts. Okay, now that the crisis is somewhat averted, let's talk about engine mounts like I was supposed to talk about 6 hours ago. All right, I bought these on eBay. I like these a lot. These are cool. They're beefy, and I like them. I just like them. I think it's a great design. I used them on the Buick, and they're only, you know, maybe 30 bucks a pair. They work good. And I was going to use them here, but if you notice, the engine mounts area is right around here on the block. You can't see the bosses, but maybe you can, but they're there. Excuse me. And right below it is the Jaguar original engine mount pad. Well, it works out in this situation where I can use those pads. They're close enough to the engine mount area that I can make something work. Thing is, with those eBay mounts, they were a little bit too far rearward, and considering I'm dealing with a lot of space issues around that steering rack, I'd rather have the mount closer forward, pretty much lined up with that pad. So these are not going to be used. They're going away for another day. So what I got were the commonly seen cheapo adapters. These bolt to the LS, and I don't know which way is up. I'll figure it out. And use traditional, I'll call it 1968 to 1972 small block or big block Chevy mounts. Not the clamshells. Well, you could use clamshells on here, but the clamshells started in 73 and they're a lot bigger and I don't like them. The only deal with these earliest style mounts is they break. And because of that, I never use a rubber mount on the driver's side, only on the passenger side. And obviously this is a used mount. I have piles of this stuff laying around because I've been building cars for 30 years. This is a Moroso, yes it is a Moroso, or other brand solid mount for small block or big block Chevy. Bought it at a swap meet, must have been on somebody's 70 Nova. And I only use this on the driver's side. I would not use them on both sides. I've seen them tear. At least with the whole idea of using this on the driver's side is when you hit the gas, the engine wants to roll over toward the passenger side. So solidly mounting the driver's side keeps that from happening. Using a rubber mount on the passenger side and a rubber or a urethane mount, whatever you want on the transmission, at least it's not total teeth jarring rigidness, you know what I mean? But this will keep things from moving around. So the plan is to bolt these to the 5.3, mount these however they work on these, in a point where I have them centered over those Jaguar pads, somewhere down there like that. And then I'm going to make my own towers that will bolt to the cross member and attach to the mount. So let me get the adapter plates bolted on and see what this is looking like. And because I do not have somebody to do camera work for me, this is going to be almost impossible to video, so I'll just tell you what I'm doing. These are the bolts countersunk that will go through the bracket into the block, through the tapered holes. I'm going to put some blue Loctite on them and get these bolted to the block. And then I have a few different options here, multiple options, 4 options actually, which is pretty cool, of where I can mount this. So I'm just going to get it centered over that Jaguar factory pad on the bottom, and that should work really well. All right, got a spot for the driver's side. Looks good. It's pretty much lined up with my original pad there. And I got plenty of room for my power steering lines, so that's goodness. And just a note, if you buy these, as usual, universal fits nothing. 2 of the bolts have to be shortened. These are the ones that they give you are too long. 2 of them will bottom out and hit the block. So cut off wheel and shorten them up. And when you cut down a bolt, use the cutoff wheel and put a little chamfer on the edge there. Don't just cut it straight across. It just makes it more chance that you'll pull the threads out of whatever you're putting this in. All right, let me get that installed now. Next issue. This is always fun building cars. This part of the engine mount is hitting the LS block. What that is this is what we call an interlocking engine mount. Basically, if the rubber broke, this is supposed to keep the mount from completely failing and having your engine flop around. Being as this is going to be on the passenger side, it's not really a concern. Driver's side mount is normally the one that'll break. And since I'm running driver's side solid mount, I don't expect any issues with this, so excuse me. I'm going to take the cutoff wheel and buzz this piece out of the way. All right, these pieces are hitting too, so we'll cut those off now. All right, that mount is in there. That took a lot more effort than it should have. So, got the solid mount on the driver's side, the rubber mount on the passenger side. You can see I have the engine supported by a high-tech piece of wood and a shim. That gets me my clearance over the steering rack there. And yeah, looking at this, if AC is in the plans for this car, and it probably is at some point, I will not be using the factory compressor in that location. That's not happening with that motor mount setup. But I have seen the aftermarket bracket that lets you use the like 1990s smaller, I think it's an R4 type compressor. I can't remember, don't quote me, but it's a little round guy and you can move it up to the top of the engine, and that's going to be the trick. I think that's definitely the way to go on this build. Of course, that's not happening right now. This just needs to go forwards, backwards, and get running. I got to order some more of those studs for the exhaust manifolds. Those are left over from the Buick. I was kind of on the fence about those, and I actually really like them. It keeps you from beating up the threads in the head. So I'm going to buy some more of those. And I think it is finally time to do what I was supposed to do hours ago, and that would be the engine mounts. But because today has been one of those days, I guess, where you say, it's been a long day, even though it really wasn't a long day, but it was a long damn day. I think I'm calling this video here. So this will be the end of day 7. Not a whole lot got done, but if you build stuff or do anything in a garage, you have those kind of days. So come back refreshed on the next one and get the engine mounts made. See ya.